Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to the Fireside Chat with Aliza Knox, building your team and career in APAC. I'm Brandon Chia from the Singapore Economic Development Board, or EDB, and will be your MC for this program. The EDB is a government agency under Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry that's responsible for strategies that enhance Singapore's position as a global center for business, innovation, and talent. We support companies in their global expansion by providing information, connections to partners, and access to government incentives for their investments, as well as their transformation and growth initiatives. For more information on how we can help your team, contact us at edb.gov.sg. Today, the EDB is delighted to be hosting Aliza Knox for a fireside chat on how you can build your dream team and career out of APAC's leading launchpad, Singapore. Aliza built and led APAC businesses for 3 of the world's top technology firms, Google, Twitter, and Cloudflare. Named 2020 APAC IT Woman of the Year, she spent decades as a global finance and consulting executive, and is now an author, non-executive board director, a senior advisor for BCG, and a regular columnist for Forbes, where she shares her wisdom and humor to help professionals who dream of doing it all. The session will be moderated by SzeKi Sim, Senior Vice President and Head of the EDB's Brand, Marketing, and Communications Division. SzeKi was previously Executive Director, Community and Brand at SG Innovate, and helped establish SG Innovate as a leading force in driving deep tech innovation and entrepreneurship in Singapore and internationally. SzeKi's career in marketing also includes leading teams at global tech brands such as HP, Motorola, and Nokia. For today's program on building your team and career in APAC, we'll be having a 25-minute moderated panel, followed by a 15 to 20-minute Q&A session. Please drop your questions throughout the chat in the Zoom Q&A function. Aliza, SzeKi, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Brandon, and good morning, good evening to all participants. Thank you for joining us. Aliza, welcome. A big thank you to you. I'm so excited and looking forward to our chat. Let's start with your incredible career story in the APAC region. Would you help to describe your journey so far?
Sure. I'll try to be, I'm been around a long time, but I'll try to make it short. So having worked in tech companies, I now describe my career as software releases. 1.0 was Boston Consulting Group and financial services, including Visa and Schwab. 2.0 was Google, Twitter, and Cloudflare. And 3.0 is now boards, books, speaking. I've enjoyed every phase and relished being able to do different things and live in different countries. And the real highlights have been building and scaling the businesses for BCG, Google, Twitter, where I was actually the first person in Asia, and Cloudflare in APAC, and setting up these firms for regional success.
Well, that's fantastic. I think you've got such a long history, but I'm very interested to know, and I'm sure the audience would be interested to know as well, why did you choose to move to Singapore, first of all, in 1995, and then you came back again in 2008? Would you share with us why you stayed and build out your career in Singapore? I think the audience would love to hear your experience.
Sure. Well, for some reason, I'd always wanted to live in Asia. I grew up in California. I studied a little bit about Asia in high school and a lot in college. I did drop out of Mandarin my first 2 weeks of college. I found it terrifying. I don't have too many big regrets about my career and things I've done, but that's one. Originally, I went to Australia partly because it was close to Asia, because that's where I went from the US in my mid-20s. And I could get away with English only there. Although I have to say, I also went to Australia for the beaches. And if you're old enough, because I'd seen the film Crocodile Dundee, which was amusing and made me think that would be a great place to live. So I went there to work at the Boston Consulting Group, and BCG said I could go to Asia to set up the firm's financial services practice area once I made partner, which is something I'd been asking about forever. Our firm was much smaller then, and there were very few people in Asia and no one focused on financial services. So for me, going to Singapore was a great opportunity to open new markets and gain really broad responsibility. And I found that pattern over and over in my various regional jobs in Singapore. It's a great place to be able to learn to go to market. And because Asia is so diverse, you don't learn how to go to market just once, you learn by country, and you gain a lot of experience dealing with a variety of cultures and business issues. So that was how I first came to Asia. And then why Singapore? Well, for financial services, it needed to either be Hong Kong or Singapore because those were the hubs. And in the end, we chose Singapore because we were about to have our first kid. Singapore seemed more family friendly then. It had a lot more greenery and space in the populated areas. Hong Kong, frankly, is bigger, but those areas, nature areas, are more outside of the living areas. And it was really known for nightlife. Singapore was and still is known for great schools, both local and international. And if you come here, you have choices of both as an expat. Good child support, really family friendly, great for young kids, and really good for older ones too. When my kids were teens, one thing that was really amazing here is they could go out alone safely. They don't drive early here. You know, there's not no crime, but almost none. And so they could have a lot of freedom early without any concerns. I don't think I really thought about that at the time, but, you know, looking back. And also, you know, except for the pandemic, of course, Singapore was a great place from which to travel. We had all these fantasies and they became realities of, you know, going to Hanoi for a weekend, exploring different parts of China, Japan. So then in 1999, we moved to the Bay Area in California for great job opportunities with Schwab, both my husband and me, and to be near my parents. But by the time I was speaking to Google in 2007, we really knew we wanted to come back to Asia. We missed all the aspects that I've already spoken about Singapore, but we also really wanted our kids to be what I've heard called global sapiens, you know, having a great mixed view of the world and being able to mix with different people. And our kids have 2 passports, Australian and US, and 2 languages. They went to a Mandarin school in San Francisco, living out my dreams, my failed dreams of college language. And they're boring in Singapore. Their friends have got 5 passports, 3 languages, or the other way around, mixed race. You know, there's so many really interesting people here. And I think coming back here just made sure that all of us really had a great world perspective, which I love.
You know, Aliza, thank you so much for sharing. I think, you know, I always love to hear stories, people like yourself, you know, hearing about why you chose Singapore and, you know, and especially since you came back, you know, that's really testament to, I guess, what Singapore can offer. And I also agree with you with regards to the safety element. I think we in Singapore take that for granted, but that's something that is so important, especially for us with families. So thank you so much for sharing that. You've had a long career. You've led operations in APAC for some of the world's top tech companies, including the likes of, as you shared, Google, Twitter, Cloudflare, Visa, and you've also experienced building tech teams during periods of rapid expansion for these companies. Why did you choose to localize so many of these teams in Asia using Singapore as a launchpad?
Yeah, SzeKi, that's great that you emphasize the safety, and I think it is important, but I think sometimes Singaporeans forget to appreciate how just diverse it is here, which I love. You know, you guys have been living with the, you know, great mix of ethnic Chinese, Indian, Malay for so long. And then all the expatriates from different places. You probably forget that not everybody lives in a community like that. And so I find that a real privilege here. But in terms of localizing teams, each of these companies, including Boston Consulting Group, had to face decisions on where do you put teams. You know, you want to try to optimize for cost and productivity. You want client-facing teams at a minimum to understand their clients. And so when you think about it, there are always lots of options in Asia. So for Google, Twitter, and Cloudflare, who were just launching in the region, although Google had at the time also a big presence in India and some in Japan, we wanted people in Singapore to be from all over Asia because that's where our clients were, right? We wanted people who understood Korea or understood Thailand or understood Indonesia. But at an early stage, our view was it didn't make sense to have lots of small offices everywhere. That is too expensive and it was too dispersed. We were trying to build a culture, shared values, and strategy. And since the pandemic, I think there's much more openness now to remote work, but this challenge of creating a culture, a shared culture remains. So our plan was to open in one place first, and then eventually take people from this office to seed the next locations. And because Singapore historically been very generous in granting visas to people from all over Asia and continues to be, and is attractive to people from all over Asia to live, it's not hard to find good people either already here or who want to come. So for example, if we wanted to support Taiwanese customers before we were ready to open an office in Taiwan, it was easy to find people from Taiwan who were already in Singapore or wanted to live here. And then ultimately, if we were ready to open an office in Taiwan, maybe some people wanted to remain in Singapore, but some people wanted to go back. So that was the strategy that all of those companies used, and it worked. All of them considered launching in Australia because, like me with Crocodile Dundee, everybody, especially Americans, think, oh yeah, I'll go to Australia, great beaches, good weather, they speak English. And LinkedIn did start there, but eventually found they had to move to Singapore to really grow in Asia, as an example, Hong Kong and Taiwan. But in the end, Singapore won out. Australia, the distance is pretty far. I think, that may have lessened in people's perspective with more remote work post-pandemic. But one of the cultural findings for us is that more than any other part of the world, clients in Asia want to see our teams in general. And so travel from Australia is harder, longer, and with the pandemic, far more expensive. Hong Kong always had the specter of what might happen with China, and that's probably more of an issue now. And Taiwan is similar and doesn't have as good an airport or international connections as Singapore. So all those places are great places to live and have their really positive points, but for the companies that I worked for and for many other tech firms, Singapore won out. That goes for Twitch, for Yahoo originally, for Airbnb, and we could go on. Singapore's very business friendly, as people who live and work here know. It's easy to manage the work environment. You can get things done efficiently. There's a familiar rule of law. If you're on this call and you're considering Singapore, I'm sure you know all that. But it really is a good place to just be able to land and start getting things done immediately.
Aliza, thanks. I think also Singapore as a gateway, it's fabulous because we are just truly a step away from Southeast Asia. We're right at the doorstep of Southeast Asia with 650 million in population, a very robust and thriving digital economy. And you add on a couple more hours in your flight, you're in China, one of the biggest in terms of opportunities, huge opportunities there, and also India. So it's truly a great gateway. And I'm kind of tickled to keep hearing you talk about how you were inspired by Crocodile Dundee and wanting to, visit Australia. And I'm actually hoping that our Crazy Rich Asians that launched a few years ago has also helped to inspire some people about piquing their interest in Singapore, wanting to find out more. And, I'm hoping, Hollywood does wonderful things, doesn't it, in creating perceptions and building perceptions. One of the greatest things, I'm sure, moving to another country, an unfamiliar territory, is about how your family would adjust. Are you able to share a little bit from a personal front? What was your experience building a life and family in Singapore and how they're coping or how they were coping?
Yeah, sure. And actually, it's pretty funny. I mean, Crazy Rich Asians came out well after I lived in Singapore for years, but of course we loved seeing it. And I'm not sure if that was the final straw in inspiring me to do it, but I finally got my act together and have been learning Mahjong so that, maybe eventually I'll understand that part of the film. And it is a great film and it does show.
Well, we must get a game together then.
Okay. All right, good. You have to invite me. I'm probably not as good as you. And actually, we've seen quite a few people coming here and doing Crazy Rich Asians weddings, which is pretty funny, as destination weddings. But so one of the things I like best about Singapore, my family did, besides the diversity, is the fact that, you got to find someplace when you move here, whether it's a bike group, a book club, a church, a university alumni group, you want to start meeting people maybe outside of work. And if you're coming from bigger countries or bigger cities, although Singapore's got 5.5 million, but still, so not that many cities are bigger, but you've got to find some way in to meet people. And so one of the things I've found is I've met a wider variety of people of all ages. So for example, I went to a university in the US called Brown. There's an alumni group here, and it's not that big. There are a few hundred of us. And through that group, I've met a lot of friends. And I have one friend who's 10 years older than me, who's half Chinese, half Japanese, but who's settled here. And then I've got friends of all ages, down to a young friend and his wife who are Singaporean, and they're only 7 years older than my older son. So I can't believe they want to hang out with me, but they do. Like, they call us to go out to dinner, call us to go to the movies, and they don't call me auntie and uncle, so I don't feel too old. And it's great. And I just don't know if I'd be making, I mean, I know people like that in the tech world because I work with younger people, but it's a really nice aspect of living here. I've also enjoyed picking up badminton again. I played in junior high. I was looking for something inside and air conditioned. I got something inside. It's not always air conditioned, but it's great sport. Our family loves the local food at hawker stalls. There are a lot of places here where there's traditional Singaporean, different types of Singaporean food outside, very inexpensive. My kids used to compete to see who could eat the most satay sticks, because they put satay on these little skewers at Newton Circus. So they would pile them up on plates. And, you know, there are challenges too, such as, if you can't tell, especially because the background, I've got very curly hair. Yeah. It's not the most prevalent here, so I had to work hard to find a hairdresser. In the beginning, you have to make sure, you know the right time zones when you call home. And I'm addicted to Diet Dr. Pepper. So if any of you do decide to move here from the US, if you could bring me some, it's very hard to get. But there's lots going on. My husband and I here spend a lot of time at art galleries, going to local theater and trying new restaurants. And we're also really active angel investors. As SzeKi was saying, this is the doorstep to Southeast Asia. There's finally more attention on, like, there's just myriad of opportunities in places like Indonesia with 300 million people, and Vietnam, as well as in Singapore. For an instance here, there's a lot of activity in plant-based and cell-based meat, because Singapore wants to be more food self-sufficient, and we've invested there. And I belong to a couple groups that focus on sourcing and funding pre-seed and seed deals. So there's just a really wide range of things that you can do here, and different experiences, some like those you might have wherever you're from, and some really different, and it's great.
Yeah, I think having also moved out of Singapore and lived abroad for a bit, like you said, right? I think Singaporeans take things for granted. Everything works here. It's kind of nice, kind of coming back and, having Singapore as a place as your base where things work. It's a nice livable city, but a doorstep from, I always call it Southeast Asia as our playground. And also from the business perspective, the kind of opportunities that are available here within Southeast Asia, but also, in the innovation ecosystem as well. There's so much happening, right? The ecosystem is thriving. There's a lot of support from the government. I think that's one of the unique points about Singapore that makes it such a great place for people to come in here and use this as a base for the region. But let's kind of shift our discussion a little bit and move to talk about talent. In the Great Resignation and the post-pandemic era, it is getting very difficult for tech leaders to effectively build and retain their teams. And in your book, you talk about the mind shift of connection trumping tech savvy, even in tech, where you make a great point about how social connection and the strength of relationships help organizations to succeed. Can you share with us, Aliza, what tips you have for tech leaders who may be on this webinar right now, who are looking to build strong teams in APAC?
Sure, and thank you for mentioning the book. I'm going to take the one opportunity to, I'm not sure if I can do it. Oh, it's not really working very well.
Yeah,
so
it's kind of
ghosty. Try to show you my book, Don't Quit Your Day Job, but it's not working. Anyway, so look, I think the reason I talked about connection trumping tech savvy is that I think even if you're great at tech and use all sorts of ways to connect with your team via technology, you still need emotional connection with employees. And I think we found that during the pandemic. And for a lot of these companies, you're going to come here. There is a talent war. There's a great pool of talent across Asia. And I said Singapore is really a good place to be able to draw them in, because you're not limited to one country. And Singapore really helps give visas so you can draw from all over Asia and beyond. But I think, and a lot of what I wrote about, is that emotional connection is the key differentiation between distributed workers succeeding within the company or losing motivation and eventually leaving. People collaborate across functions better when they feel close to each other, whether they meet like serendipitously in the break room or they don't meet in person at all. And there's lots of data saying that people generate more new ideas and revenue, form stronger client relationships, and stay longer with a firm if they feel emotionally tied. And Gallup, in fact, says that improves profitability by 20%. And so what's interesting is that I think that long before the pandemic, APAC leaders were already thinking about this, how to make their teams feel emotionally connected, and still have to think about it because our employees generally are dispersed. You might launch in Singapore, but you'll find if you have a regional role here, if you're building regional businesses, you will ultimately have offices in other places in Asia. And so it's important to do what I call taking the R out of remote. So that leaves you with emote. And there's a number of techniques to do this, and I've written about it in the book, Don't Quit Your Day Job, but I will highlight just a couple. So one, I think for leaders is really to make more time for recognition than seems necessary. This is particularly important in Asia. I think acknowledging employees' achievements matters a lot, and it's especially important if you're not seeing people often and for certain cultures. You can express appreciation spontaneously if you happen to see somebody, but if people are far flung or working from home, you don't have that serendipity. So I think leaders need to really make the effort to share workers' successes more broadly. So if you're a leader here, if your firm, like many Silicon Valley firms, has like video town halls and where there are updates around the world and shout outs, you need to go to great lengths to make sure there are examples of APAC clients described. So I often find a firm will revert to, say, Gap and MasterCard in the US, whereas you could say, hey, listen, you know, my region's important. Let's talk about Uniqlo and China UnionPay. Or they might, you know, it might be easy to talk about Susie and John because they saw them do something great in San Francisco or New York. Why not make sure that we're also talking about SzeKi and Katz, who've done some great things in Singapore and Japan. Another thing that I think APAC leaders really need to do is to make sure the team members are actually seen. So in the book, I share an example. Actually, the book is mostly examples of how people have done things, and a lot of them from APAC, but I talk about Rahul Desai, who's now at TripActions, but who worked as in sales ops at both Google and Facebook in Singapore. And he really focused on using his periodic trips to the US, because if you do move here from another country to open that country's offices, some of you may come here for startups, but some of you may come for another company already. And he really learned to use those meetings to highlight the work of others on his team who would not otherwise have exposure to senior management. So for example, in one case, he highlighted a set of reports that was now being used globally that had been set up by somebody in Asia and was so good that it was now used around the world. And that meant that he could basically push for promotions for his team, which is really important if you're a leader, and highlight the work because he was making his team more visible. So those are two things I would say that are really important to do if you're a leader here within a broader business.
Great points. I think, recognition and sharing things that are being done, from different parts of the world, that helps to also promote best practices and learnings, right? That diversity always adds to the richness in a team. And I think that, all of us are facing that as leaders, right? The pandemic has caused a bit of separation and a bit of anxiety, especially for people who joined during that time. So it's kind of balancing out. I think more and more people are wanting to have that balance between work from home and coming to the office. But how do we balance that out so that the team still feels emotionally connected? And the important thing is the relationships with their co-workers and visibility with management and senior leaders. Well, thank you for that. I do want to encourage the folks on the call and on the webinar right now, please take this opportunity to ask your questions. Aliza has had a wealth of experience in Asia and specifically in Singapore, so take this opportunity to ask her, some of the questions that are burning in your, that you have, that will help you to get more knowledge as you kind of go through this period of discovery to learn more about Asia. Let's kind of talk a little bit, Aliza, about female leaders. You're one of the most prominent female leaders in tech in Asia today, and a very passionate mentor to the next generation of leaders who are pioneering their companies across new frontiers. What's your take on the state of women in tech in Asia today? And what advice would you have for women in tech considering a move to the region to rise and thrive in their careers?
Well, first of all, I'll take the advice. You should come. It's a great place. You get a lot of responsibility early and lots of challenges, lots of both intellectual and emotional learning, and there's a lot of support. But let me go back a minute, SzeKi. I think disappointingly, like every part of the world, we're not yet at gender parity. It's getting better, but still not where I would like it to be. The Boston Consulting Group and the Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore did a study recently that showed that the tech industry in Asia is getting more diverse, which is great. Women make up 28% of the tech sector workforce globally. Southeast Asia is leading because women are 32% of the tech talent. And out of Southeast Asia, unfortunately, Thailand beats Singapore by a percentage point. Thailand is 42%, but Singapore we're at 41% of women in tech. So there are generally really good opportunities here. And there are lots of support groups here, some government-led, some sort of crowdsourced privately. So there's Women in Tech, there's the IMDA, which I just mentioned, Infocom, there's EDB, who's sponsoring this, there's Women in Cyber, and you don't have to be in tech, there's Women in Financial Services, there's Board of Gender, which helps get women on boards. There's a smaller group that's kind of crowdsourced called Women Helping Women, which is mostly founders. And I'm very active mentoring one of the women there. So there's lots going on. And in addition, as I mentioned before, there is really high availability and relatively low cost of quality childcare and housekeeping. So it does make it easier for women to pursue careers and then spend time with their kids when they're not working. So, we've been fortunate enough to be here a long time. We have a helper who's amazing. And I don't cook anymore, which I suppose is a lost skill that I'll have to resurrect at some point. But it means that when I'm home, and I also don't do laundry very much, which doesn't mean my clothes aren't clean. I'm not dirty. It just means someone else is helping me do it, so that I was able to work and put a lot of heart and soul into it, but also have a lot of time with my kids. You can do that in other places too. It's probably more readily available and less expensive here. So it's not the main reason to come, but it's certainly an added feature to all these other great things about opportunity and interesting life that you get.
Hey, Aliza, I do want to add on to that point. I think that we really cannot downplay this availability and affordability of helpers in Singapore and in Asia. I do know from my own experiences and expat friends, that's one of the big reasons that they don't want to go back, right? Because I think, jokes aside, helpers have been truly part of a lot of the families here in Singapore that enables us to go out and work. And they become part of the family as well, right? Help us stay with families for many, many years. And it just really helps to kind of, with the logistics of taking kids to school and being at home with the kids, which is truly an asset. And I think that really helps us to be out in the to be out in the workplace and to build our own careers. And it helps to keep balance as well for myself anyway. I think that, with some of the great anecdotes that you shared, I've got the first question coming in from Ting Lin. Thank you for the question. The question is, what similarities and differences do you see between Western and Southeast Asian tech? How do some of the Western techs, how do they need to be customized when they're implemented locally?
Thanks. I'll answer that in a minute. It just occurred to me in the last section that we haven't talked at all. We talked about childcare, but we haven't mentioned healthcare at all. And that might be something that people think about coming from countries with strong healthcare. And just to be clear, Singapore has got amazing healthcare. And probably easier to navigate for an expatriate than various countries, and very nurturing. So for example, I spent a couple days in hospital having my children here, maybe a little bit longer than in the US, depending on whether I think you can go home sooner too, but I've been very, very happy with that. I don't mean to sound like a commercial for Singapore, but it really is, it is very good. In terms of the tech, what's interesting is I've worked for Silicon Valley firms that are very, very focused on keeping the tech standardized. So we don't make too many customizations because the whole point is to scale. And one thing that I saw at Visa many, many years ago, before they became a public company, was we'd customized in the region so much that, as a cautionary tale, I was living in the US at the time. I had a Visa card. I went to London and it didn't work because Europe had moved to chip and pin and the US had not yet. And so I actually worked for a company which had a single single product that was supposed to work. The USP was that it works everywhere, and it didn't. So I'm always wary of making too much adjustment. I mean, Visa changed all that, and I'm not criticizing them. It was a long time ago, and they're now much more of a tech network, but it's something to think about. So these companies try not to adjust too much. However, I would say two things. One is my learning has always been that for companies from outside of Asia, they've had to learn to do, I would consider it more hand-holding in Asia, not because Asians don't catch on to things or aren't early adopters, but there is more of an expectation that there will be more time spent with clients. So whereas we had US clients at Google who never cared about seeing anybody, never cared if it was all online, we had clients here for the same products who wanted to at least speak to us, often see us in person for sales or for customer support or for engineering support. So that's something you have to take into account. What level of managed service do you need to have? Do you need more in the way of partners to provide that? It's not always true, but I have found it consistently true in all of the businesses I've been in. Then I think the second thing you need to adjust for, Cloudflare is a network business, and the networks are different in Asia. The technology is different. So in some places, the support, for example, there aren't enough C cables to support the speed at which clients want things. And we have to explain it to them and deal with that because that is a global issue, not our own technology issue. So you will definitely face some adjustments. And it's really interesting to learn about that as a business leader, because you might assume one thing coming from the US or Israel or France, and then you get here and you find out, well, the infrastructure's actually different, or the firewall in China actually slows things down, and your technology might be faster, but it has to deal with the infrastructure that's in place here. Or you might find that getting servers into India takes longer than you thought. You ship them there, but there's a whole process of getting them out of customs. And even though you hire companies to do this for you, it's slow. And so your supply process about getting things set up has to change, or has to acknowledge that there are different issues. You definitely have challenges, and there are definitely some things Western companies, so to speak, might expect, but you get used to them and adjust, and you find some ways around them.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, your point about relationships in Asia, Southeast Asia, APAC, definitely true. I do find that, in interacting with customers in this region, relationships are extremely important. And it goes a long way in helping to close the deal as well. And it's also true that, within Asia, it's very diverse, right? You go from one country to the next, cultures are different, and some of the practices have got their own idiosyncrasies and nuances as well that we all need to adjust. I'm very happy that questions are flowing in. I'm gonna see the next one. Considering your background in tech and in angel investing, what are the companies you admire most coming out of Singapore and the region?
Ooh. Well, I'll just tell you a few angel investee companies to keep an eye on, not all of which I've invested in. There's one called Tyndall, that's plant-based meat. There's another one that I wish I could think of the name of, that's really fascinating, that is cell-based seafood. That's a female founder. There's another one called OmniStream, another female founder here who is building a retail shelving, or has built a retail shelving algorithm that's being used in the US and Australia already. There is Aspire, which is like Bill.com. There is Azentio, which is a roll-up of different kinds of insurtech and banking software. There are obviously the unicorns that you must have heard of, like Traveloka out of Indonesia, Grab out of Singapore, which is ride sharing. There's a really interesting one out of Indonesia called Chili Belly, which leverages the fact that there are a lot of rural people and they basically wholesale groceries to small villages, and it gives women jobs, and they pass out the groceries. So there's really a lot. Some of them, there's something like Zero coming out of Vietnam. I forgot what it's called, quite high tech accounting systems. Some of them like Chili Belly, tech underbelly, but I guess a pun there, but really using the local communities as support. Yeah, I probably shouldn't go on, but there's lots.
Well, thank you. I think that a lot of the companies that you mentioned, actually, like the companies that were built in Singapore, obviously, I just want to call out that a lot of the companies, they build out of Singapore, but with a view that their customers are not just in Singapore, but in the region and also globally. So I think that, Singapore has a great infrastructure. We've got it's a livable city. We've got a lot of support talent that really helps to enable founders and startups to build their companies from here to address the global market.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, sorry, I was gonna say, I mean, most people come here, if they're coming out of here, it addresses the global market. And I just looked up the seafood is called Shock Meats, and I don't,
yes,
you should pronounce shock correctly for me and explain what it means.
Yeah, sure. So it's Shiok Meats, and Shiok is spelled SHIOK, and it is actually Singlish. I mean, Singapore, we're known for Singlish. We have our own little language going on, which is really English, but with our own colloquialism and intonations that are quite unique to Singapore. And Shiok effectively means really yummy or really good. It gives that feeling of like, oh, yum, or, very, very positive vibes, right? So that's effectively what Shiok stands for and means. I hope I captured that rightly. But okay, yeah. So let's move on to the next question. You've had a long history. Could you share some of the mistakes that others have made while scaling in the region that we can learn from?
Sure. Well, yeah, and look, it's not like I haven't made mistakes. I think the one I mentioned for Visa is a mistake. And that was global, where we had the products became so different that they were no longer fully globally useful, which is, goes against the unique selling proposition. They've completely changed that. I think sometimes not adjusting to culture. So I really think you need a mix of locals, and maybe, you seed somebody from the US or France, or even if you're doing Southeast Asia, from Korea, who understands the home business. But if you land an entire team of Israelis or Germans here, it's pretty hard to succeed, because there are things you just may not understand about the market. And as many lists as you could get from me or somebody else, you probably won't get it right. So I think those are a couple mistakes. Personal mistakes. I would say on average, people are a little more softly spoken here, maybe not as informal. You can make mistakes by you can tell I'm pretty outspoken. So I've learned to try to be a little bit softer while I'm here, but also similarly encourage some people who are a bit quieter, who've experienced more like rote learning as opposed to American style, get out there and speak and share your opinion, to be more forthcoming, because that's a lot of what leads to success and things running from consulting to tech firms. So maybe those are some mistakes.
Yeah, and just listening to you, Aliza, you bring up such great points, and it's truly, I mean, I can feel that, your insights are truly from your experience that you've had here. I would just add on to the point that, we really can't take things wholesale from one country to the next. I think it's important for, folks coming out to the region to really sit down and spend time listening to the customer's needs. And yes, you're right. People may not be as forthcoming in being very open. And when you speak, because that's also a bit of the Asian culture. So having some of the local talent in place and on the ground to be able to suss out the nuances and read in between the lines, I think that's really important. And especially goes back to the point again about how relationships are very important, because when you have those relationships, you can tease out a lot more information from the customers, which will be very valuable as as the company adjusts and adjust the products and solutions for that particular market.
Yeah, I mean, I've also found things that most companies do some sort of upward feedback survey, quarterly, annually, whatever. And, there's a couple countries where it's always positive, always positive. I think people have the view that even if it's anonymous, they're being watched. And so you get these off the chart scores. And if you don't know, you think that every leader and manager there is the best thing since sliced bread. But if you watch it for a couple of years, it's always the same, even when the leaders change. And there's at least one country where it's always negative. They feel like it's their one annual chance to say anything bad because it's not polite to do it otherwise. And the scores always look terrible. You get that country scored back and you go, oh my God, our business there is a disaster. Everybody's going to quit. And so, without experience or someone sort of explaining it to you, you get overexcited about one and over worried about the other, and they're both incorrect. So those are kinds of things you learn in cultural differences as well. Yeah.
Spending time, because I think customers appreciate, that you're spending time with them and listening to them and not kind of like, downloading that, okay, this is what we have, take it, it just doesn't work that way. We're all about personalization and customization, right? So that's important.
Okay.
Here's a question.
Just for that one, I was talking about the internal staff more than the customers, but I think you're right, it applies to customers too. Yeah. I wasn't clear.
Well, that kind of moves on quite nicely to this next question. Can you elaborate a little more on how you localize your teams in Singapore? What are the challenges that you've faced and how did you overcome them?
So that one hasn't been hard. Singapore is so multinational when people get here. So we're not necessarily trying to localize the Singapore teams. We're trying to almost, in all these cases with me, internationalize them. I want to have a team that can respond to Thai customers, Vietnamese customers, Indian customers, Australian customers, until I have people in those offices. So we generally, we give people a bit of HR support so that they can find an apartment and, start to make friends. In a lot of these tech firms, their first friends are the people they're working with because they tend to be around the same age. But we really haven't had issues localizing teams here. It's a pretty international city. I don't know if SzeKi is going to get mad at me for saying this, but sometimes people call it Asia light. It's in Asia, it's exotic in many ways, and yet it's sort of Western in many ways. So we don't find too many people have trouble localizing here. In fact, what we see is a lot of people want to localize more. A lot of these companies end up supporting people to apply for permanent residency and then citizenship.
Yeah, which goes back to the point that, makes it very livable, right? Because it's Western, because, well, the main language is English. It makes doing business in Singapore easy, but at the same time, you're truly a hop and skip away from Asia, from Southeast Asia, and, a couple more hours on the plane and you're in China and India. So I think that is the uniqueness of Singapore as well. And that is a positive point. I don't take offense at all to that, Aliza. Okay, one question that came here. What are the tips, also related to the last question, what are the tips you have for hiring both tech and non-tech talent in the region, especially in country?
That's harder. Prepare for competition right now. There's a lot of talent, both in tech and non-tech, but it's very sought after because a lot of people come here. I don't know that there's a better country to go to where you'd say it's not competitive. I'm on some boards in Australia, and where we're hiring mostly domestically, and it's the same problem. So I think right now, we're still in this Great Resignation or Great Reshuffle. So for me, for most of these, for companies that already have people here, I'm trying to help them focus really on retaining people. But for hiring, I think, you need to look around at companies like you, make sure that you are competitive, not only in salary, but in benefits. I think if you're trying to hire women, because we talked about women a little bit, I've always found that when I'm running the region, we have the highest percentage of women, partly because I really, like to try to hire women, but also just because people can see a female lead, and whether they can articulate it or not, I think they see, oh, this is a place for me because maybe I could advance to the top there. So there are some programs here that help. The EDB and some of the universities will help with recruiting. Actually, Singapore goes to great lengths to bring in talent from other parts of Asia. It gives them scholarships here, and part of those scholarships are that they need to stay in Singapore for a while. So you can go to NUS and TU and get good scholars out of those programs. And, like everywhere else, LinkedIn works. And then there are some search firms here. If you're feeling that you need help, there's a company called TrueSearch that focuses primarily on tech that's global, but there's no inside tips. It's like everywhere else, it's tough. And once you start getting employee referrals are always the best, right? Because those people tend to, get higher acceptance rates and stay longer.
Yeah, definitely a challenge when it comes to tech talent, but the EDB we've got, and Singapore, we've got a few different pathways to attract tech talent that we can help companies as you're looking to hire. So do get in touch with us, and we certainly can help you through the process when that opportunity arises. I like this question. You've had such a long career and in Asia. So it's great that, you're sharing firsthand views to the audience. Maybe you could share what is the biggest highlight or biggest highlights of your career?
Oh, that's very kind. Well, I think I started off with just being able to build businesses in Asia for BCG, Google, Twitter, Cloudflare, and I also did it for Visa and Schwab when I was in the Bay Area. To me, that's the highlight. Like, I just love the experience that I get, both the intellectual and the emotional challenge of trying to grow a business. But the most personally fulfilling part is growing the people. So this is not specific to Singapore, but I've really had the opportunity to hire people who maybe weren't sure what they were going to do or didn't have enough confidence. For example, I hired a Singaporean woman who had a master's from the US as a EA in Google. And I was like, why are you an EA? You're clearly so talented. She's like, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm not sure what I can do. And she's gone from, I said, okay, well, be an EA for a couple of years and let's see what you want to do. And she went on to project management and then to sales. And now she's running a group at ByteDance, very successful executive. And I've got a number of stories like that in the book, Don't Quit Your Day Job. And to me, that's been the most personally fulfilling aspect. And presumably I could have done that somewhere else besides Singapore. The fun part about doing it in Singapore was, if I look at those people, some of them are Indian, some of them are Singaporean, some of them are Taiwanese, some of them are American. So I've had the great experience of being able to get to know deeply and work with and help accelerate the careers of. They're good people. I'm sure they could have done it without me, but I maybe helped accelerate or broaden their perspectives of people from all over Asia and the world. So I really liked that.
Oh, thank you, Aliza, for sharing that. That is so inspiring. And it's, when you have that kind of impact on a personal level and professional level, it really must mean a lot for you as well. Your sharing has been so inspirational. I'm just mindful of time, so it's time to wrap up. But maybe one final thought from you. For those on the call right now who are learning, discovering, and wanting to explore Singapore or Asia, what would be your one piece of advice for them?
Well, maybe they should come here.
Cool, I like that.
get on a plane, call the EDB if you want. You can call me. You can find me on Twitter. It's just my name, so you have it. I think come see it. Come see it for yourself, or just look up all the startups here. You can get them on probably PitchBook or Crunchbase, and just look, or TechCrunch, and look at everything that's going on here. It's just an amazing array of really interesting activities, from startups to large companies. And we host most major international companies, as well as, very innovative small businesses. And so you'll find almost anything you want here. And then once you get here and see the food in addition, you probably won't want to leave.
Yeah, that is so true.
Taste the food is better. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Well, that is so true. I've met many my expat friends who came here thinking, oh, it's going to be a 2-year gig, and they've ended up spending more than 10, 15 years and building a family and a home here in Singapore. And it's always inspiring to hear stories from people like yourself, Aliza, because you have the first-hand view. You've done amazing things in Singapore, from Singapore, for the region and for the world. You've impacted many people's lives on both a personal level and also professionally. So thank you for that. Thank you for being part of, I would say, Team Singapore. And with that, I really thank you for your time, Aliza, and also to all of you who've participated and joined us, and for all the questions. I thank you very much. And I'd like to pass you back now to Brandon.
We've come to the end of the Fireside Chat with Aliza Knox, and a big thank you to Aliza for sharing her insights on navigating the APAC region professionally and personally in such a generous way with us today, and to SzeKi for moderating the fantastic conversation. Do check out Aliza's latest book, Don't Quit Your Day Job, outlining the 6 mind shifts you'll need to rise and thrive at work, and to integrate your professional and personal goals to build a fulfilling and complete life. The book is available on Amazon today, and please scan the QR code to check it out.
Thank you. I like SzeKi's view of Team Singapore. So can I say that I will be forever a cheerleader for Team Singapore?
And we thank you for that, Aliza.
Thank you very much, Aliza, SzeKi, and we hope to host you again for a conversation again in the near future. Finally, to receive invitations to future events like this, as well as the latest business guides and insights on navigating the Asian business landscape, do subscribe to the EDB Insights community by scanning the QR code on the screen or visiting the websites dropped into the chat. Thanks for connecting and joining today's session, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.